Welcome to Fireside Gaming. I'm Billum, and in a rare case of being relevant, I'm checking out an indie game that was just recently released. That game is Pseudoregalia. This is a Metroidvania that was originally created as part of a game jam, which it won. If you're unfamiliar with game jams, they're competitions to make games of certain themes in a limited period of time. However, don't take that to mean that Pseudoregalia is a rushed project. While it's true it came out in a game jam, that was back in March. Since then, developer Ritzler has been expanding the game with new areas, a more fleshed out story, and other enhancements. And while I haven't played the Game Jam version of Pseudoregalia, its itch.io page lists a playtime of about 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours. To put that in perspective, my playthrough of the Steam version clocked in at just under 6 hours. So I can only assume that there's been some major changes made since its Game Jam release. Considering that Pseudoregalia is a new release, I won't be going into detail about the story in my video. That's just my policy when it comes to new games. But I will say that the story that is there is limited in scope. The game isn't focused on wowing players with an in-depth narrative or anything like that. Instead, they'll get a few hints here and there about what's happening in this world, and only a real idea of what they've been up to throughout the game during the end. Personally, I'm good for this. This type of light storytelling is something I can get behind, especially as it matches the PS1 aesthetic the game is going for. I do have a couple of gripes with the theme of the story, but that's nothing major as it's actually a larger complaint about the indie game market that I don't need to delve into here. You know what? Never mind. I'm delving. Here is a quick spoiler warning as well as a timestamp to skip to if you don't want to know anything else about the story of Pseudoregalia. I have grown so very tired of indie games harnessing depression for their stories. It's gotten to the point of it being a meme with all the indie games that focus on it, and it is a completely oversaturated niche right now. And I get it. Depression is one of those almost universal things, whether it be something simple like being in a slump, losing your drive for the things you love, or a more extreme instance where it's having a major negative effect on your life. Trust me, I've been there. But that doesn't mean I need to play so many games with it as a focus. Now, to be fair to Pseudoregalia, it doesn't get too heavy into this theme and instead is more positive with its presentation. Sure, the world is a bit dark and bleak, but the player's job is to overcome that and free the person suffering. It almost has a Klonoa kind of feel to it in that regard, and I could see us getting more games set in this universe. As a small note, I also find it really cool that it took me about 6 hours to beat the game, because it's set during an individual's dream, and a night of sleep is about 6 to 8 hours, so that seemed neat to me. I just thought that was worth mentioning, kind of like nicely ties up the themes of the game. Okay, with that little quick mini rant out of the way, let's talk about the gameplay. And boy does Pseudoregalia bring the gameplay. This being a Metroidvania, players can expect to collect abilities that allow them to progress further in the world while also revisiting areas they couldn't reach before. That's the standard for this genre, and Pseudoregalia doesn't disappoint in that regard. But what's more interesting is the platforming this game offers. This is clearly the main focus of the game, with players collecting several movement upgrades for Sybil. Yes, that's the main character goat cat bunny lady we play as in Pseudoregalia. And yes, she's not big on pants and is a thick girl. Control yourself so we can get back to talking about the game though. The limited moveset that players have at the start of the game may not impress them, but it doesn't take long to start picking up new items and seeing what this game has to offer. There's loads of fun mechanics here, such as a slide that can eventually be chained into a long jump, as well as wall kick boots, a wall running ability, and a ground slam into high jump, and others. It all comes together to create movement in a game that is dang near perfect. And the world of Pseudoregalia is perfect for testing it out. I love so much about the level design of this game. It's clear the developer thought about the fact that players wouldn't explore this world all in the same way. For example, I ended up in this dark underground area that I was almost positive I shouldn't be in yet. And I could have left it if I wanted to. But instead, I pressed forward and ended up grabbing the ability to bounce off of enemies with my attacks well before I should have. To be clear, it was hard getting to this point. Even without the darkness, the game presented me with several platforming challenges along the way. And while I wasn't properly equipped for them, the abilities I'd collected up to this point were enough to get me through with some careful planning. And that wasn't the only time I did this either. I went through the entirety of a platforming gauntlet in an area called Sansa Keep that, in hindsight, was clearly meant to be done with the Cling Gem, which lets Sybil run along the walls. I didn't have it at that point. Was it hard? Yes. Did I spend way too much time on this challenge? Also yes. but dang if I didn't get such a sense of satisfaction from completing that area. Funnily enough, I didn't even realize that I would need a different ability for this part. I just thought the game was really requiring me to master its platforming mechanics. Also, there are stools to rest at to regain health at least one point in this challenge. I didn't yet realize that sitting on stools restored health, so I did this with a limited amount of retries before I died, which happened a couple of times. And I also finished the last part of the area when I only had one hit left before I would be sent back to the start where the save crystal is. Like I said, I had a real sense of joy and excitement whenever I got through this area, and it's been one of the most satisfying challenges I've dealt with in a platformer that I can think of. But I do suppose that this is one of those things about Pseudoregalia that some players might not enjoy. The game doesn't hold your hand at all. There's basic descriptions for each ability when the player picks them up, but that's about it. Outside of that, it's going to be up to the player to really learn how to use the skills in the game. Heck, there isn't even a map option, which is a deliberate design choice by the developer. That also might rub some players the wrong way, but I've gotten pretty good at mental mapping over the years, so it didn't bother me. I'll even go so far as to say that I think this choice is to the game's advantage. It's clear that Pseudoregalia is designed with fun in mind. That's why despite it being a Metroidvania game, there's no map or ability to check the percentage of items collected. Instead, players are just rewarded for exploring its world and taking in the sights by sometimes finding extra goodies lying around. It eliminates the check system where you feel like, I have to completionist this, and that's something that I feel like kind of ruins games at times, so I appreciate it not being here. Among the items that players can find, by the way, include health upgrades as well as other buffs for combat and such. And I guess at this point I have to talk about the fact that there is combat in Pseudoregalia. I haven't really mentioned it because it's clearly secondary to the platforming, but it is here. Sybil has a simple 3-hit combo and can gain some other martial abilities along the way. The combat never gets overly complex, and most enemies can be dispatched with little trouble. There's also only 2 bosses in the game. The first acts as more of a tutorial to get used to the combat and will show up as a later enemy various times throughout the game. And then there's the final boss. I won't talk too much about it since it's spoiler territory, but know that I found the fight to be a lot of fun while also offering a decent level of challenge. The most important part of combat is actually the magic that Sybil gets from it. As she hits enemies, she builds up a bar for magic. Players can use this magic to heal themselves by ringing a bell on the end of Sybil's cross weapon, which allows them to get back into the battle after a quick breather. That makes up the core of the combat loop in Pseudoregalia, and it's not bad, even if it is a bit bare bones. I also love the chiming of the bell to heal. It's a fun little animation, and being able to ring the bell multiple times for a larger heal is a great mechanic as it hampers Sybil's powerful movement abilities by requiring her to remain still. Those heals can also be used to give her additional chances whenever she's platforming, which means beating up enemies along the way through the castle that you may not necessarily need to fight is worth doing. Honestly, players really will just want to get lost in Pseudoregalia and its world, which means the lack of focus on combat is a plus. While the game is only about 6 hours, it offers a few distinct areas during that time. It all has this very dreamlike feel, which the game doesn't hide is a core aspect of its themes. That's even mentioned in its Steam description, so it doesn't count as spoilers. And I am completely down for this aesthetic. It's just a mood all in of itself. The Empty Bailey was easily my favorite area. The awe and wonder that filled me when I first entered it was excellent. Especially as my first sight was this long bridge surrounded by fog that led off to who knows where. Well, I do actually, because the game let me climb up to it and traverse that bridge, which was a welcome design as it wasn't just a non-reachable set piece. I could really just run around this area for ages, sliding, flipping, and jumping around its various buildings and the courtyards. Part of the reason for that also has to do with the soundtrack of Pseudoregalia. Let's just mince all the frilly talk about music and state it like it is. This game is filled with bangers. So much so that I picked up the OST on Bandcamp after beating the game. I'm listening to it right now. And I will be listening to it for years to come as these tunes will find their way into my favorite video game music playlists. I probably won't get any kind of copyright strikes since Pseudoregalia is an indie game, so here's a quick listen to Outside the Castle Walls. It's the theme for the Empty Bailey area and my personal favorite of the 11 tracks in the game. And adding to the stellar soundtrack is a collection of perfect sound effects. Those small little tings and pings from platforming and smashing enemies all fit together well with the scene that Pseudoregalia presents. Seriously, there's so much personality in just these, and they do a lot to sell the game's PS1 presentation. If it isn't already clear, I loved my time with Pseudoregalia. It's a real out-of-nowhere hit for 2023, and I'm super grateful it popped up on my Twitter feed. Playing through this game has been the most pleasant experience I've had so far this year while holding a controller, and it only cost me $6. I have no doubt that I'll revisit it in the years to come, and I would love to see it get a sequel. I'll tell you what, I'm also going to just be keeping a tab on Ritzler. They have a clear understanding of what it takes to create fun movement and engaging levels in a platformer, and I want to see more of what they can do. With all that said, thanks for checking out my review of Pseudoregalia, and until next time, take it easy.